Every now and then you hear me say something like, I never ever thought I would publicly say this in Canada. So this is one of those occasions. I never ever thought that I would publicly say that a parliamentary official invited an old Nazi to the people's house. I never used the word Nazi casually, and that is because of my family's background. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. An old Nazi who served during World War II in Ukraine in a specific regiment, which we'll discuss in just a few moments, was mistakenly, I repeat, mistakenly invited to an event which was to honor a person who is considered right now one of the champions of democracy anywhere in the world. That happens to be a man by the name of Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. The Russian chief propagandist, and that would be the president of that country, Vladimir Putin. Authoritarians always tell big lies. That's part of the way they behave. And the biggest lie that he tells is that the reason he's got Russian forces in Ukraine is to liberate Ukraine from Nazi rule. So this was a victory, among other things. This was a victory. This black eye for Canada was a victory for Vladimir Putin and for authoritarianism around the world. David Pugliese is a journalist with many years of experience working for the Ottawa Citizen and Post Media. He has talked to me from time to time over the years about various subjects, but there's one subject that we're going to get into that has gotten him into some hot water with certain people in this country who I will simply call extremists. David Pugliese, thank you so much. Welcome to the Charles Adler Show, the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you.
David, I hope I'm not overstating when I say that you've gotten into some hot water because of extremists in this country who don't like what you're writing about.
Yeah, I've actually covered this type of subject for 10 years now, and before that. So there are, various things said about me and various threats and such. So, but that's just journalism in 2023. So you just get used to it and you just keep chugging along.
So this person, I'm going to deliberately omit his name because I don't want to give him any more due. This person is not alone. This person is among many in this country who served Hitler's final solution, served that particular cause in various countries of Eastern Europe and, of course, Germany. And so the first question we need to ask, beyond what happened with this, let's call it, bureaucratic error that gave Canada a black eye, beyond that, the big picture question, this was, after all, a Canadian citizen we're talking about, this old Nazi. And I need to ask David Pugliese, someone who's done more research on this than most, why is an old Nazi among many old Nazis? Why are they in Canada? Why are they Canadian citizens? Why are they here?
So after World War II, there is a push among some communities in Canada to get some of these former Nazi soldiers, Waffen-SS individuals into the country. So what happened was this gentleman that we're talking about, this individual was with the 14th Waffen-SS Galicia. So Canada let in about 2,000 of these individuals into the country. There's a lot of pressure from some in the Ukrainian community at the time to let these individuals in because, the idea was, they're anti-communist. As well, though, there was pushback from others in the Ukrainian community in Canada who said, no, these individuals are war criminals.
So help me understand, because I'm making the assumption that many people who are listening don't really know very much about the Cold War. Why would the term anti-communist, despite what someone has done, serving in a regiment dedicated to the murder of Jewish civilians and others, why would the fact that they are anti-communist give them a green light into Canada?
Mm-hmm. Well, during the Second World War, the Soviet Union was allied with Canada, the United States, and the Allied powers. They fought with our side. as Canadian troops were landing at D-Day, American troops landing at D-Day, pushing towards Germany. Russian troops, Soviet troops were pushing towards Berlin. But after the war, quickly after the war, Cold War emerges, and anyone who was anti-communist gets a new life, so to speak, and is looked upon as in a positive manner. Now, so during the war, the Nazis recruited a lot of individuals from their occupied territories, and one of the things that they pushed was they're fighting communism. They're fighting the Jewish inspired communist organization. And if you take a look at the recruiting poster for the 14th Waffen SS, which this individual joined, there's a caricature of a octopus with a hook nose and a Star of David on it. And you've got a Waffen SS man with a sword ready to chop its head off. So they were pushing this whole thing, and they were getting individuals who were of that mindset.
And I suppose we should add here that when it came to Nazi propaganda, it doesn't matter whether you were viewing it in Ukraine or the country I was born in, Hungary, or of course Germany, Poland, and elsewhere. If you're viewing Nazi propaganda, very often the Jew was always portrayed as some sort of animal, because it was important for Nazis to portray the Jews as subhuman. So very often they would be vermin, they would be rats. In this case, they would be an octopus, but they wouldn't be human. And that made it easier in terms of the impact of propaganda. That made it easier for many people to sign off on the idea of literally eliminating the Jewish population in their midst. Needs to be said that half of European Jewry, 50% of Jews living in Europe, were eliminated in what Hitler called his final solution, of which this old man was part of. I wonder, David, if you could indulge us in a quick primer on the difference between being a German soldier or a Ukrainian soldier or a member of the Waffen SS. What is the difference between a regular forces member and a Waffen SS member, which is what we're talking about here?
Well, the German army, the Wehrmacht, fought on the battlefield. Now, it has to be said that the units of the Wehrmacht also took part in atrocities. However, the Waffen SS, the SS, was the main Nazi organization that organized the final solution, as you mentioned, the murder of 6 million Jews and other individuals. And the Waffen SS was the fighting unit of the SS. Now, they also took part in massacres, atrocities. They were involved in hunting Jews down, Jewish civilians who had escaped into the forests, that type of thing.
Why was a Waffen SS, and I think a lot of people have been confused in the last few days because they associate Nazism with Germany. They don't understand why a Ukrainian would be a member of what is perceived to be some sort of German regiment. So I wonder if you could just explain to us why some people in Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, would actually be involved in a German operation, a German mission. What's that about?
So there's a couple of things at play. When the Nazis invaded Eastern Europe, they were able to murder large numbers of Jews, basically because they had support of Eastern European collaborators. So the Third Reich, the Einsatzgruppen organizations that did the killing, they were very small when it comes to numbers. And so they relied on Ukrainians, Latvians, Estonians, Hungarians to police up Jewish civilians and then take them to their death in killing fields and such. In 1943, as the Third Reich was starting to collapse, the Germans were starting to lose the war. So Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, he needed more manpower. And he turned to these occupied territories and he put out the call for individuals who wanted to serve in units of the SS. So a French SS unit was developed. Latvian SS, Estonian SS, and Ukrainian SS. These were volunteer organizations in the beginning. So when Himmler put out the call for Ukrainian SS, he received 80,000 individuals who wanted to serve voluntarily. They selected around 10,000, 12,000, and put them into battle. And then later on, they had conscripts, but the initial group that went into battle were volunteers for the Third Reich.
Do we know that the individual who was in the House of Commons gallery volunteered for the Waffen SS?
Yes, he's confirmed that he volunteered. He never hid his background. There's a website honoring 14th Waffen SS, and there's photos of him in his Nazi uniform that he provided them. He said that his time in the SS was a great time, so he is a volunteer and he has acknowledged that.
So help us understand something else here. These days, we keep hearing about Ukrainians desperately wanting to be independent of Russia. We hear about the sacredness of Ukrainian independence. With tens of thousands of Ukrainians volunteering to be part of a German mission, as it were, was Ukrainian independence not as important to many Ukrainians in the 40s, not as important as it is now?
Yeah, I mean, what happened is nationalistic groups volunteered to help the Third Reich, to help Hitler, because they thought eventually they might get some independence. And there's a hatred of Stalin, there's a hatred of the Russians. However, what's missed here, you have a small number of Ukrainian nationalists fighting for the SS, for the Nazis, but you also had 4.6 million Ukrainians fighting in the Soviet army, the Red Army. So there is a big difference there. So the supporters of the Third Reich, of Hitler's ideals, were very small in Ukraine.
So it's fair to say that the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians who were fighting men, and for the most part they were men, for the most part were fighting with the Allies, fighting with us, as it were. And is that the case?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, and one of the points that I've made is, if you want to, in Parliament, honor a Ukrainian war veteran, there were 40,000 Ukrainian Canadians who fought in the Canadian Army, Air Force, and Navy. Why not take one of those individuals and put them in the gallery for 2 standing ovations, as opposed to a Waffen SS member?
This is something that over the many years that I've done broadcasting, especially in Winnipeg with a large Ukrainian population, it's always been something that I've needed to be very, very surgical about, because the last thing any Ukrainian Canadian living in Winnipeg or elsewhere wants to hear is the thought that his ancestors were fighting on the side of the Nazis. A small percentage were, but overwhelmingly, Ukrainians were supporting the Soviet Union. They were part of the Soviet Union, but in supporting the Soviet Union during World War II, they were supporting the Allied effort. They were supporting the idea of destroying Nazism, not building it up, not supporting it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the pushbacks or the disinformation you get from some of these Ukrainian nationalists is when you bring up these matters, you're smearing Ukraine, you're smearing Ukrainian Canadians. But that's not the case. There are a lot of brave Ukrainian Canadian men and women who fought against the Nazis, and so it's not a black and white situation. The question is, why would you honor Nazis?
So the other issue about all of this is the Jewish question, as it were. Many Ukrainian Nazis, and this 98-year-old, I'm sure, was one of them, believe that the Soviet Union in and of itself was a Jewish conspiracy. Difficult to understand how that can be the case when Joseph Stalin himself murdered as many Jews as he did. Help us with that, would you?
Yeah, so the Soviets were anti-Semitic. Stalin was anti-Semitic. Large numbers of Jewish people were killed. by Stalin and his various purges. Part of this comes to the fact that there were members, or there were Jews who were members of Stalin's secret police. And so that's focused on by the Nazis. There were members of the Jewish community who were part of Stalin's government or his officials, and so that was focused on by the Nazis to to push this narrative.
What happened to Jews in Stalin's government after World War II? Is that something worth mentioning here, David?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the Soviet army. I mean, if you take a look at there was a movie a while ago called Defiance about Jewish partisans during the Second World War, and when they tried to join up with the Soviet forces, they faced a lot of anti-Semitism as well. So, there's obviously anti-Semitism on both sides. But this whole idea that communism is this Jewish-controlled cabal, it's right out of the Nazi playbook.
Just to be fully transparent here, my father served in a prisoner of war camp. He was there for 3 years. That particular camp was in Siberia, and it would astonish my father to ever hear anyone publicly talk about how the communists were Jewish friendly, or that Stalin's regime was Jewish friendly, because my father, a Jew, certainly never experienced friendliness in that Siberian camp that he was in for 3 years. David, let's move on to the Canadian situation, because people are still asking themselves, how could this happen? What actually did happen, and who was responsible for it?
Well, so what happened was this individual was brought into the House of Commons. He was introduced by the Speaker of the House, Mr. Rota. He was honored as a hero, a Canadian hero and a Ukrainian hero. And then Rota said he fought against the Russians during World War II. Well, that's your clue that he wasn't on the Allied side. So, at that point, they should have realized. But instead, he was given 2 standing ovations. And then, what happened next was Jewish groups realized what was going on. A Ukrainian professor at the University of Ottawa found the website with the individual's photos in Nazi uniforms. A Jewish newspaper called The Forward in the United States wrote the first story, and then it started to go from there. So, 3 Jewish groups have issued demands for an apology. The Polish government has demanded an apology because the 14th Waffen-SS was implicated in massacres of Polish women and children during the Second World War.
So, David, you've spent a great deal of your life in Ottawa as an Ottawa Citizen reporter. I just don't understand. Beyond the fact that Anthony Rota, the Speaker of the House, may not be fully aware of who was on whose side in World War II, and beyond the fact that his office missed the obvious, isn't there a security vetting that the Prime Minister's office or some other government agency is involved in to make sure that we don't end up with an old Nazi in the gallery?
You would think if you were going to put an individual in the House of Commons as a guest of honor and then point him out, and you have all the members of Parliament, clapping for him. Right near him is Chief of the Defense Staff, General Wayne Eyre, who would have known who was on Canada's side during World War II. You would think that there would be some kind of vetting process. How does an individual like that just emerge? And we'll see if any of this comes out, what vetting there was. I'm sure journalists are going to be putting in access to information requests to find out what happened, but it's going to take a while.
So, I get the fact that the House of Commons Speaker screwed up and he invited someone that he shouldn't have invited. I understand that, but I just think that there must be something. There must be some process to decide ultimately, regardless of who's invited, ultimately uh, what is making Parliament more secure, less secure. But Parliament, the House of Commons, especially because of what happened a couple of years ago, where someone nearly got away with murdering a number of members of Parliament. The House of Commons is supposed to be one of the most secure areas in Canada.
Sure. And when I was a member of the House of Commons press gallery, RCMP did a security check on me when I covered Prime Minister Harper's trip to NATO, to the NATO summit. There was background checks done on me into my background by police. So I just find it very strange that this individual was able to enter the House of Commons without any type of background check. It just does not make sense. The other issue is, did someone say, okay, you fought during Second World War. Can you tell me a little bit about your military service? Because the Speaker of the House thanked him for his military service. So you'd think, okay, what unit did you fight with? Was it the Princess Patricia's? Was it, the Royal 22nd? These are all basic questions. It just doesn't ring right that there wasn't some kind of background or knowledge there.
So you mentioned earlier, David, that we had thousands of people who had served Hitler's forces in various Eastern European countries allowed into Canada, and one of the, I suppose, the rationales was that they had fought communism. All right, is Canada an easy mark? Was Canada a soft target for these people who had fought with the Nazis, or did many other Western countries allow them in just as we did?
Well, England allowed them in. The United States allowed them in. There's documents in the British government's archives where the British government knew that the 14th Waffen SS may contain war criminals, but they wanted to dump them onto Canada. So they were able to do that for some of them. The United Kingdom went through its own scandals in the 1980s as well, where BBC or different British media outlets tracked down Waffen SS soldiers living in the United Kingdom.
So the Simon Wiesenthal Center is one of the first to have reacted to this horrible situation in Canada this week. Can you tell us a little bit about the center, about Simon Wiesenthal and what that is about?
So he was a famous Nazi hunter. He had been in a concentration camp, and members of his family were murdered. So after the war, he made it his mission to start hunting down some of these individuals, exposing them. And when he passed on, the organization still continues to this day.
So, David, you've been writing about military matters since 1982. Have you ever asked a Canadian official the question, if we're aware of someone who is a member of the Waffen SS, why doesn't our government initiate extradition proceedings to get them into some other country where crimes were committed, so that country, like Poland in the case of this particular individual, so that some country can put them on trial? Because surely to goodness we believe that justice, regardless of how old someone is, justice should be brought to bear here. And if our country can't be doing it, at least we could be enabling justice rather than covering it up.
Yeah, Canada's come into a lot of criticism for its poor record in hunting down Nazis, as well as extraditing them to other countries. And so what usually happens is these individuals just run out the clock, just make a legal representation after legal representation, and they're able to delay this. I mean, this happened in the case of an individual in the Waterloo area. And he eventually passed on, but they were trying to boot him from the country. And he was, he said, "Oh, I didn't see anything." He was a translator for an Einsatzgruppen death squad. He said he was a translator / mechanic. Yeah, so there's always some kind of excuse, and there wasn't a lot of push among Canadian government officials after the war. People just wanted to move on with their lives, and so these individuals have been able to live amongst us without any repercussions.
I think it's incumbent upon us to mention that the death camps, Auschwitz and others, were run by the SS, the same organization that this individual was a member of.
Hmm.
So, David, over the years, you've heard many rationales for many evils. And one of the rationales that's often given for people like this is that they had no choice. Do we have firm evidence that people who were members of the SS itself, I'm not talking about uh, regulars with forces that were allied with Germany, I'm not talking about regular soldiers here, but do we have evidence, hard evidence, that people who were members of the SS enthusiastically participated, volunteered, wanted to be doing what they were doing, wanted to participate in what are known around the world as war crimes?
These individuals in this unit at the beginning were volunteers, and this individual acknowledges he was a volunteer. People are saying, "Oh, he was a young guy; he wouldn't have had a choice. He wouldn't have known." It, First of all, it was well known in Ukraine and the Eastern European nations, that the final solution was happening. They just didn't know the extent of the killing. Ukrainians saw their Jewish neighbors being marched away to be executed. The same in Latvia, the same in Estonia. This is well documented. So he volunteered to support Adolf Hitler. He took an oath as part of joining the Waffen SS. He took an oath to Adolf Hitler. So not a lot of wiggle room in there. I guess you could say, and then other Ukrainians went to fight for the Red Army. Now, a lot of those were conscripted, as they didn't have a choice, but they still fought for the Red Army. So, it's hard to reconcile.
And just to be clear, the Red Army, in the case of World War II, the Red Army was on our side. We were on the same side, and we had many ideological differences as countries, but there was one thing that we all had in common, and that was the defeat of fascism, the defeat of Hitler. David, what kind of a political propaganda victory is this week in Canada? What kind of a victory is it for Vladimir Putin?
It was served up as on a platter for Putin. It is a propaganda win of enormous proportions. He is now Russia is now using this to say, "See, I told you so." We had to invade Ukraine because it's populated with Nazis, and this gift has been provided to Putin. The issue is, it's interesting to see Prime Minister Trudeau say, "Well, we have to be, cognizant of Russian disinformation," but his government served this up on a platter. He shot himself. They shot him. They shot themselves in the foot.
David, I wonder, before we depart, if you could help us understand why you, David Pugliese, have been so interested in this subject of SS and other miscreants, alleged war criminals being in Canada. You've been vitally interested in this, writing about this, and taking some hits from extremists about this for more than a decade now. What brought you to this?
Well, I've just been. It's an area of interest, military interest in history. I mean, the more that I understand it, I guess what I'm seeing now, and it is a terrible thing that's happening as our war vet. My family fought against the Germans. My uncle, fought his way into Germany. My other uncle was in Lancaster bombers over Berlin, and they're all passed on now. But what's happening is incredible. It is a distortion of history where members of the SS are now heralded as heroes in some of these Eastern European countries. There are parades to honor them. And so I think we owe it to our veteran community and to Holocaust survivors. Holocaust survivors are dying off by the day. Our veterans are dying off by the day. And if we don't point out the wrong aspect of this, I think we're failing them.
David Pugliese, thank you very much for the great work that you've done. It's a service to journalism. It's a service to Canada. It's a service to freedom. I want to thank you for everything that you've done, and I treasure our association. Thank you very much for doing this.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Ottawa Citizen journalist David Pugliese, who happens to be a defense specialist and has been writing about defense matters for decades. I'm Charles Adler.